Welcome to Staffworks Explained. If you're here for the first time, please consider subscribing to this channel. In today's video, we'll be looking at the Mouse Summit Malaba Highway, where we see is the Kenya's next mega project. And some are asking, or is it another election year promise? We start by looking at the promise, the politics, as well as the price tag. Barely a year before Kenya begins slipping into another election cycle, the government has turned its attention to one of the country's busiest roads, not by announcing construction but by taking what appears at first glance to be a modest administrative step, approving and launching a pre-feasibility study for the proposed upgrade of the Mouse Summit Eldoret Malaba Highway. Ordinarily, such an announcement would attract little public attention. Government commissions feasibility studies all the time. Many never progress beyond consultants' reports gathering dust on the shelf. This one is different. The proposed highway is not an ordinary road. It forms the western section of the Northern Corridor, East Africa's most transport artery. Every day, thousands of trucks carrying fuel, food, construction materials, machinery, consumer goods, and humanitarian supplies travel from the port of Mombasa through Nairobi, Nakuru, Eldoret, and Malaba before crossing into Uganda and continuing into Rwanda, South Sudan, and sometimes Eastern DRC, as well as Burundi. In economic terms, this road is the backbone of regional commerce. That is precisely why the latest announcement deserves closer scrutiny, not because construction has begun, but because of what it signals, what it does not say, and whether the ambition matches Kenya's current economic reality. Here we examine what is actually being proposed, why the government has revived the project now, whether the economic support, such as investment, and whether Kenyans are witnessing the early stages of a transformative infrastructure program or familiar rhythm of large promises preceding a general election. Let's start by looking at the study and not a highway. The first point worth making is one that has largely lost in the headlines. The government has not approved construction of the Mouse Summit Malaba dual carriageway. What has commenced is the pre-feasibility study financed by the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank to determine whether the project is technically, economically, and environmentally, as well as financially viable. The study began in February 2026 and is expected to take about 4 months. At the same time, the government has started procuring consultants for a full feasibility study and transaction advisory services, which will undertake detailed engineering, traffic forecast, environmental assessment, as well as financial modeling before any procurement for construction starts. That distinction is important. A pre-feasibility study asks whether a project is worth pursuing in principle. It does not determine exactly how it will be built or whether it should proceed. Only after a comprehensive feasibility study is completed can the government decide whether the numbers make commercial or economic sense. Yet, public disclosure often treats these early announcements as though construction is imminent. It is not. Now let's look at the road which is under consideration. The proposed project covers approximately 243 to 245 kilometers of existing A8 highway, stretching from Mouse Summit through Londiani, Timboroa, Burnt Forest, Eldoret, Turbo, Webuye, as well as, and then terminating at Malaba on the Kenyan-Ugandan border. It is intended to continue the ongoing Rironi-Nakuru Mouse Summit expansion, creating continuous high-capacity corridor linking Nairobi with Western Kenya and eventually to Uganda. The proposal envisions transforming today's largely two-lane highway into a modern dual carriageway with 2 lanes in each direction, grade separated intersection in some locations, improved safety features, intelligent traffic management systems, as well as climate resilient engineering designed to withstand increasingly frequent flood, and extreme weather. Current estimates place the project cost at around 300 billion Kenya shillings, although this figure remains provisional until detailed engineering and financial studies are completed. To place that figure into perspective, Kenya shilling 300 billion exceeds the annual development budgets of several government ministries combined. It is not simply another road. It would rank as Kenya's largest infrastructure investment. Now, why does this road matter? Anyone who has traveled this corridor understands why the government is considering expansion. The road carries extraordinary volumes of freight. Heavy commercial trucks share large single carriageway with buses, private vehicles, motorcycles, and pedestrians. Long queues frequently develop around Eldoret, Burnt Forest, Webuye, and Malaba, while overtaking maneuvers on narrow sections contribute to serious accidents. Transport economists often describe congestion as an invisible tax. Every hour truck remains stationary in traffic increases transport cost. Drivers continue earning wages, fuel is consumed while idling, goods arrive late, retailers wait longer for deliveries, manufacturers experience supply delays. Eventually, these costs find their way into supermarket shelves. Consumers pay. Government argues that expanding the highway would reduce travel times, improve safety, and strengthen Kenya's competitiveness as the principal gateway to East and Central Africa. Those arguments are not without merit. The Northern Corridor handles the majority of imports destined for various countries in East Africa. Talk of Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Eastern DRC. When the corridor slows down, regional trade slows with it. The economic logic behind improving the corridor is therefore easy to understand. The harder question is whether this particular project represents the best way to achieve those objectives. Then the question, why now? Infrastructure rarely exists in isolation from politics. That observation is neither cynical or uniquely Kenyan. Major public works are visible. Roads, bridges, airports provide tangible evidence that governments can point to during campaigns. Unlike reforms in healthcare, education, or public finance, infrastructure is easily photographed and easily understood. Timing, therefore, invites legitimate questions. Kenya is steadily moving towards 2027 general election. Within the past year, attention has intensified around several large infrastructure proposals, including new expressway as well as transport corridors. None of these proves political motivation, but neither should timing be ignored. Large infrastructure announcements have historically featured prominently in election periods across successive administrations, regardless of political party. The challenge for citizens is distinguishing between projects backed by financing, engineering, and procurement from those that exist primarily as aspirational concepts. The Mau Summit Malaba proposal currently remains in the planning category. That does not diminish its importance. It simply means its future depends on decisions that have not yet been made. Now let's follow the money. Perhaps the most important question has received surprisingly little public discussions. The question is, who pays? Kenya's fiscal space has narrowed considerably over the past decade. Public debt has increased while government continues balancing demands for healthcare, education, security, agriculture, and social protection. Building another mega highway directly from national budget would be difficult. Government therefore intends to pursue the project under the private-public partnership model, commonly referred to as PPP. The concept sounds technical, but it's relatively straightforward. Instead of government borrowing all money and paying contractors itself, private companies or consortium of investors raises much of the financing, designing of the road. It builds it, operates it, and maintains it over an agreed concession period. Government then allows investors to recover its money, usually through tolls collected from motorists over many years. Supporters argue that this approach enables countries to develop infrastructure without immediately increasing public borrowing. That description, which, while partly true, leaves out an important detail. A PPP does not eliminate cost. It changes who pays, when they pay, and how the risks are shared. Ultimately, somebody still financing the highway. If motorists pay tolls, they finance it gradually through user charges. If government guarantees minimum revenue, taxpayers may still shoulder part of financial risk. If traffic volumes fail to meet expectations, investors often seek the negotiations. In other words, PPP redistribute financial obligation rather than making them disappear. Whether this becomes good value depends entirely on the contract agreement or government eventually signs. Is Kenya moving too quickly? That's another question that has been asked. Speed with which the project has been advanced raises another important issue. Within months, government has launched the pre-feasibility study, while simultaneously initiating procurement and for comprehensive feasibility study as well as transaction advisory process. Current timelines envision requests for investors qualification before the end of 2026 and competitive bidding during 2027, subject to successful completion of studies and statutory approvals. Efficient planning is desirable, but infrastructure of this scale demands caution. Traffic forecast must be robust. Environmental impacts require careful examination. Land acquisition issues can derail projects for years. Projected toll revenues must withstand independent scrutiny. Overestimating future traffic by even a modest margin can fundamentally alter whether a toll road remains financially viable. Across the world, transport economists have repeatedly warned against allowing political timetables to dictate engineering timetables. Roads remain in service for half a century or longer. Election cycles last 5 years. The two should never be confused. The challenge facing policymakers is therefore not simply delivering infrastructure quickly. It is ensuring that speed never comes at the expense of sound economic judgment. In the next part, we are going to examine whether the projected traffic volumes justify a highway of this magnitude, what it could mean for truckers, businesses, and towns along the corridor, whether Kenya is competing with its own railway investment, and who ultimately stands to gain or lose if one of the East Africa's most ambitious road projects becomes reality. Now, let's look at who wins, who pays, and does the economic add up. The case of expanding the Mau Summit Malaba corridor appears straightforward. The road is busy, congestion is common, and accidents are frequent. If more vehicles are using the highway, then it was designed to accommodate. If more vehicles are using the highway than it was designed to accommodate, then building a bigger road seems like an obvious solution. Infrastructure, however, is rarely that simple. One of the questions transport economists ask is not whether the road is congested today, but whether the proposed investment is the most efficient way of solving the problems over the next 30 or 40 years. A highway costing an estimated 300 billion Kenya shillings is not judged only by how traffic it removes today. It is judged by whether the economic benefits it generates over decades outweigh its construction, financing, and maintenance costs in terms of benefits and cost. That calculation becomes particularly important in a country with limited public resources and competing development priorities. We say that congestion is real, but the question is adding lanes enough? Northern Corridor remains East Africa's busiest trade route. That is not debatable. Almost every imported product entering Uganda passes through Mombasa before traveling along this road. The same applies to a significant share of cargo destined for other countries in East Africa, Rwanda, South Sudan, Burundi, Eastern DRC. As economies grow, these regional economies, freight volumes are expected to continue increasing. There is therefore little dispute that constraint on this corridor will continue. The more difficult questions concerns the solution. Building an additional lanes increases road capacity, but transport planning has repeatedly demonstrated that road expansion alone rarely eliminates congestion permanently. As roads become wider and faster, they often attract more traffic. Freight operators shift routes. Private motorists who previously avoided traveling at peak periods begin using the highway more frequently. New commercial developments emerge along the corridor. Over time, much of the additional capacity becomes occupied. This phenomenon has been observed repeatedly in cities as well as intercity corridors across the world. It does not mean roads should never be expanded. It simply means expansion is not a permanent cure for congestion unless accompanied by broader transport planning. Kenya therefore faces a larger strategic question. Should future freight growth continue relying primarily on roads, or should more cargo gradually migrate to rail? That debate cannot be avoided. Now let's look at the real question. The proposed highway also reopens an uncomfortable policy discussion. Kenya has already invested heavily in standard gauge railway. The original justification of the railway was clear. Moving freight by rail is generally cheaper, safer, and more energy efficient than transporting the same cargo by thousands of heavy trucks. One freight train can carry the equivalent of dozens of articulated lorries. If that logic remains valid, why is Kenya simultaneously preparing another massive investment designed to accommodate even more road freight? The two investments are not necessarily incompatible. Roads will always remain essential because cargo ultimately has to leave railway stations and reach factories, warehouses, and shop. Talk of last mile connectivity. Yet, transport policy works best when different modes complement rather than compete with each other. If governments encourage more freight onto highways while struggling to increase cargo volumes on the railway, questions inevitably arise about whether national transport planning is sufficiently integrated. The issue is not whether Kenya needs better roads. It is whether roads and rail are pulling in the same direction. Now let's look at the economics of tolling. The government's preferred financing model assumes the upgraded highway will operate as a toll road. In principle, this reflects a widely accepted economic idea. Those who benefit most directly from using the expensive infrastructure contribute towards paying for it. Instead of taxpayers financing the road, users pay according to how frequently they travel. The theory is straightforward. The practice is considerably more complicated. Truck operators calculate cost meticulously. Every additional charge eventually appears somewhere else in the supply chain. If tolls increase transport costs substantially, freight companies will respond. Some may absorb the traditional expense. Others will pass it to importers. Retailers then transfer those costs to the consumers. Ultimately, households purchasing cooking oil, cement, sugar, fuel, or household goods may end up paying part of the toll without ever driving on the highways themselves. Government will therefore face a delicate balancing act. Set tolls too high and motorists avoid the highway. Set them too low and investors struggle to recover construction costs. Neither outcomes produces a sustainable project. The experience of toll roads elsewhere suggests pricing often becomes a politically sensitive question as the construction itself. Will truck drivers actually use it? These questions may prove more important than almost any engineering decision. A toll highway may only succeed financially if enough vehicles choose to use it consistently. Private motorists may willingly pay for reduced travel time during occasional journeys. Long-distance freight operators think differently. For logistics companies managing hundreds of trucks movement every week, even relatively small toll charges accumulate into significant operating cost. Some operators may conclude that slower alternative routes remain economically preferable. Others may redesign delivery schedules to minimize toll payments. Everything depends on how much time the new highway saves and whether those savings outweigh the additional cost. Until the feasibility study produces detailed traffic modeling, nobody can answer that question with confidence. That uncertainty introduces or reinforces why the current stage of the project matters. The studies are not bureaucratic formalities. They determine whether the financial assumptions underpinning the entire proposal are realistic. Now, let's look at the towns which will be caught in the middle. Roads shape local economies. Anyone traveling between Kuru and Malaba passes through towns whose businesses depend heavily on highway traffic. Fuel stations, restaurants, roadside markets, vehicle repair workshops, hotels, small retailers all benefit from passing motorists. Modern highways often change that relationship. Access controlled roads are designed to move traffic efficiently, not necessarily through town centers. Where bypasses are constructed, vehicles spend less time passing through local trading centers. That generally improves travel time and safety. But it can also reduce customer numbers for businesses that have relied on roadside traffic for decades. This does not mean bypasses are undesirable. Many communities welcome reduced congestion, lower accident rates, as well as quieter streets. The point is simply that infrastructure creates both winners and losers. The gains are not distributed evenly. Government therefore faces another challenge beyond engineering. Communities affected by changes in traffic patterns need opportunities to adapt rather than being treated as unavoidable casualties of national development. Then let's look at regional competition. Kenya has long marketed itself as East Africa's logistics gateway. That position cannot be taken for granted. Neighboring countries continue investing aggressively in transport infrastructure. Tanzania has expanded Port of Dar es Salaam while improving road and railway connections towards Rwanda, Burundi, and Eastern DRC. Uganda continues upgrading strategic highways. Rwanda has invested heavily in logistics efficiency. Competition is no longer limited to airlines or ports. Transport corridors increasingly compete against one another. If the Mau Summit Malaba Highway significantly reduces freight transit times, Kenya strengthens its position as the preferred route in the region. If implementation stalls or costs escalate excessively, competing corridors may become increasingly attractive. Infrastructure has therefore become part of regional economic diplomacy. The context extends well beyond national borders. Let's now look at land composition as well as environmental realities. Every major road project eventually reaches the same difficult stage, and that's the land. Expanding an existing highway often requires additional property, relocation of utilities, and compensation of affected landowners. Those processes are among the most common causes of infrastructure delays across Africa. Compensation disputes frequently end up in court. Environmental approvals can take years. Public participation processes require careful management. The proposed corridor also traverses sensitive areas environmentally. We talk of Mau's escarpment, highland ecosystems where engineering solutions must account for erosion, drainage, as well as changing rainfall pattern. These issues rarely dominate political speeches. They often determine project timelines. And now, the biggest question here, the election factor. None of these observations suggest the highway should not be built, nor do they imply the project exists solely for political purposes. But timing matters. Kenya has witnessed repeated cycles in which ambitions or aspiration infrastructure announcement coincide with approaching elections. Some projects proceed exactly as promised. Others go through redesigning. Some remain on drawing boards for years after political attention shifts elsewhere. Citizens therefore have reason to approach every major announcement with cautious interest rather than unquestioning optimism. A feasibility study is evidence that government is considering a project seriously. It is not evidence that financing has been secured, construction contract awarded, or completion guaranteed. Those distinctions become especially important during political active periods when expectation can easily outpace reality. Large infrastructure proposals often functions as powerful political symbols because they represent future possibility. The challenge is ensuring that those possibilities eventually become measurable outcomes. And now the verdict. The proposal to upgrade the Mau Summit Malaba Highway addresses a genuine transport challenge. Traffic volumes are increasing. Congestion imposes real economic cost. Safety improvements are badly needed. Stronger regional connectivity would benefit Kenya and its neighbors. None of these facts are in dispute. What remains uncertain is whether the proposed solution represents the best economic response, whether the financing model will deliver value for money, and whether implementation can avoid the delays and cost escalations that have affected major infrastructure projects elsewhere. Equally important is the broader policy question. Kenya is making decisions today that will shape how goods move across East Africa for decades. Those decisions should emerge from rigorous economic analysis, transparent procurement, and realistic traffic forecast, not political urgency. Infrastructure should never be judged by scale of announcement. It should be judged by what delivers once the cameras have left. The Mau Summit Highway may well become one of the most consequential transport investments in Kenya's recent history. It could shorten travel times, improve road safety, as well as reinforce the country's position as a regional gateway in terms of trade. It could also become another expensive lesson in what happens when ambition moves faster than evidence. The feasibility study now underway is therefore more than a technical exercise. It is a point at which Kenya must decide whether this is project driven by demonstrable economic need or one propelled by political momentum. The answer will determine not only the future of the highway, but the direction of the country's transport policy generation. Thank you.